Welcome to the Stream of Art podcast. Join me, Robyn,
and me, Michelle, as we chat openly about personal growth, creativity, and building a career in the arts. All right, hello, Robyn.
Hi.
Would you care to update us about how your week went?
Sure. I'm trying to remember. It was a bit of a blur. I wasn't as productive as I wanted to be. So I looked through your worksheet on values, and I haven't put anything to paper yet. I was like looking at it and just kind of thinking about it a bit. It's harder than, it's not as clear cut as I anticipated. You know, like trying to figure out like of the words you kind of included on there. I was like trying to figure out which ones I resonate with the most. It's tricky, and it's kind of interesting because I was like in therapy this week. We were also doing work in terms of just like overall life values. And, and she provided me with a list, but you could only choose 2 from the list.
Oh,
it's really hard when you're But like the idea she was saying, like, because to choose more than 2, it's kind of hard. It makes it a little bit confusing. So you choose the 2, but it just so happens that like the rest of your choices will kind of naturally, you'll have other values that come in that kind of like nest underneath the overarching values, right? So, but having like, 2 primary ones. So anyways, I keep going through her list, and it changes every day, and it's similar to like the list you provided. I'm like going through it, and I was like, and I can make an argument for any of them. So I'm like, how do you decide? Like, how do you figure out like which one hits you the strongest, Yeah. So work in progress, but it was an interesting thought exercise for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm, as I think I've mentioned, I'm in the process of sort of considering some of my values and really putting the time to think about, who I am, what I stand for. Yeah, it's really challenging. So I can't imagine. As soon as you said your therapist wants you to pick 2, my anxiety just went through the roof. Like, no, I can't do it. I feel like that's just too few. I mean, on my worksheet, I suggest 3 to 5 to start with. For me, even that feels like potentially too few.
Yeah. It's really like when you're really having to narrow it down to 2, it forces you to get really honest with yourself, though.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is like for the overarching life values, I didn't even rank creativity as one of the 2, which is really interesting because I'm like, because you have to prioritize almost. It's like would I prioritize creativity over like personal growth, for instance, or something like that, right? And it's like, no, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't prioritize. So it makes you get really, really honest. And again, like it's not an exercise that can be completed in a day, right? I think it takes a lot of reflection and takes some time for you to kind of sit with the different ideas and it'll be work that I'll continue doing for the next little bit, just primarily out of curiosity. And I think it helps to like, just once you figure out what your values are, I think it does help you find direction in your life, which is kind of what I'm looking for right now. Yeah, anyways, but other than that, like it was a pretty low-key week. I've continued doing my daily painting, which is great. And I've continued doing like my like mindful breathing and yoga stuff. And then yesterday, as I was telling you before we came on here, I was playing in the snow all day and making quincy, which for anyone who doesn't know what a quincy is, it's a big pile of snow that you hollow out. And I have slept in them before, but I just felt like I didn't sleep in this one. I was thinking about it, but then Mike's like, no, I don't think I like the idea of you sleeping in there all night. I'll be worried. Fair enough.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, but it was lots of fun. It made me feel like a kid again. And it was pretty cool.
Awesome.
How was your week?
My week was really good. It was a very productive music week. I just feel like I made some really good progress on one song in particular from my album. So this is a song I wrote probably, a couple years back now, and I'd worked on it got it to a certain point, and then I shared it with some people and got some really great feedback. But I sort of hit that point where after I shared it, I just felt like I needed some space from it. So I put it aside. I'd taken notes from the people I had shared it with, so I knew what I needed to work on the next time I picked it up again. And I just felt like it was time. So I picked that up again this week, and I sat down and reworked the bridge. I knew that the vocal melody really needed to be changed up. It just wasn't quite right. So I made some pretty big changes there, and it's just so much better. So I'm really excited for the direction this one is taking. I always really liked this particular song, but I feel like, the stuff I added, there's like this little guitar lick that comes in through the bridge that I feel like really just adds something to it. So yeah, I'm really excited about that song and just about my album as a whole. I spent some time yesterday and just sat down and just like plotted out all the songs I have so far. So I have 7 that are definitely going to be on the album. And then I have about 6 or 7 that are potential album songs that have been started, but are all at sort of varying degrees of completion. So some have all the lyrics written, but I need to really flesh them out. They're just more of like a skeleton. I have some of them that are musically a little bit more fleshed out, but I need to write lyrics for. So they're all sort of all over the map, but it gave me this clear sense of what I need to work on next. So I'm going to be just going through each song, maybe spend a day or 2 on each and then move on to the next to kind of keep them all in rotation.
Right.
Because for the last several months, I've been mostly sticking with one for a while, which has been working really well because the songs that I have that came out of the last few months, I'm really excited about, I'm really happy with. So I think that process served me well. But because my overarching goal for the year is to get all of the demos done for this album, I have to have a little bit more of a mindset where I'm working on all of them at some level. So
right.
Some of them are pretty far along. There's really not much else I can do with them at this point. So I'm really just going to be targeting the ones that need the most attention and the ones that for me have a clear next step.
Right.
Because for some of them, I have a sense that something, like they need something, but I'm not sure of what that is. So I'm just going to kind of come at them every once in a while and just see if something pops out.
Yep.
But for some of them, I know exactly what the next steps are. So that's going to be sort of like priority number 1 is like I have vocals I have to retrack and guitar I have to retrack. And I have some changes I have to make to some of them, like some key changes and stuff. So I have some things that just need to get done. So as I'm doing that, I'm going to be rotating in some of the other ones that have more creative work that needs to be done, where I'm still trying to find a way to flesh them out and all of that. So that's sort of my focus with my album for now. Obviously, it's going to go on pause come February, but I'm glad to be heading into February having a clear idea of what needs to be done. Like for the next couple of weeks, I'm still going to be working on my album a lot, but come March, I can jump right back in and just pick up from where I left off.
That's kind of interesting, like having because with painting for me, I typically just have a painting on the go that I chip away at. And I know other artists who will be working on they have several different paintings on the go because they need that time away from it to kind of figure it out. Then they come back and they kind of so it's interesting, like you have the same kind of thing with your songs, like you have their different stages of completion and then you're able to sort of like go to the one that has that clear next step and then let your brain kind of like subconsciously work through the other one that still you're not quite sure what needs to be done with it. That's cool. Yeah,
exactly. And that is entirely a product of having done RPM so many times. And I now know how effective that is because I think before then I was a little bit more like what you were talking about, doing kind of one at a time and sort of feeling like I had to stick with it. Maybe not so strictly, but I think that's just the way I worked. I I just kind of had one song at a time that I wanted to work on. And sometimes I would have a song, I would get to a certain point, I'd kind of put it aside, and then I could come back to it later. There's one song in particular I wrote for the band I used to play in, and I think I had 2 verses for like a year and a half before I finished the chorus. It was just, just didn't know what to do, and then at one point I picked it up. So there are definitely instances like that before where I would put something aside and come back to it, but it was always like very stretched out. So
yeah.
My songwriting process was much slower. It took a lot longer, and I'm much faster now at being able to flesh out songs, and I'm much better at being able to juggle multiple songs at the same time.
See, for me, like, there's been times where I'll have a few paintings on the go, or like 2 or 3 paintings on the go, but what happens is that like 2 of them just never get completed. Because I lose interest, I guess, in them. And I think that's, for me, that's why I need to sort of stick with one until it's done. But I'm curious, like with you, have you ever, started something and got it like maybe halfway completed and then just lost interest? Like, does that happen to you, or do you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I have songs that I work on and I get to a point, and sometimes it's a matter of losing interest, and sometimes it's a matter of just feeling like I've taken it as far as it can go and I don't know that there's any salvaging it.
Interesting.
Because sometimes it's like, I've taken this as far as I can go, but I can see the potential in it, and I'm going to come back to it later. So I have a couple of songs for my album right now that are kind of like that, where I keep coming back to them, and I'm just not sure if I'm going to be able to make anything of them, but I feel like I can see enough potential that I'm not going to drop them. But certainly I'm completely fine dropping a song if I just feel like it's probably not going to go anywhere, and I'm not interested in trying to make it go anywhere. Sometimes a song exists, or a part of a song just exists because I had to get it out of my head. Mm-hmm. And it also helps me to better know when I have something that has potential. Like, I know what it feels like when there's something there. There's this moment and I feel like it clicks and I go, this is something.
Right.
And I've had enough of the moments with other songs where that doesn't happen that I know to distinguish between the two. And I know when something is just, it's a lost cause and I have to let it go. And I'm always fine with that. I never feel like it's a waste. Anytime I spend creating is time well spent. And if it is just something that I got out of my system, then that's great. And it just makes room for the next thing. Or maybe I've just picked up some new production technique that I hadn't tried before, or something else. Like, it's definitely like for me very much a feel thing. But yeah, I'm very happy to abandon a song if it's not lighting me up the way, because I have enough songs that light me up completely that I'd rather spend my time on those.
That's awesome. And I mean, that's the beauty of having that kind of process focused mind versus end result focused mind, right?
Yeah.
Because like, I think for me, when I don't finish a painting, when it's abandoned, I kind of feel like it's a bit of a failure. And like, I didn't follow through or something, right? Mm-hmm. Like I don't see like, well, it served a purpose and it did, but I don't see that. And I think that can be something I can work on. And there's definitely times where I try desperately to salvage something, and I just like, I have this resistance. Like I want to make it work, and it just doesn't. And I know it doesn't, and I'll ask for feedback, and it's like, yeah, not really doing it for me. And it's so frustrating to get that feedback, because it's like, I know it's true in the back of my mind, but I just don't want to admit it, because I want this thing to have worked, because otherwise, why have I spent all my time doing this? But again, like, switching to a process oriented mindset, it eases all of those kind of frustrations and struggles. That's cool.
Yeah, and I think too, for you finish enough paintings that, if every so often you have to put one aside because you just, it doesn't have the potential you thought it had, that's fine. I think there is a fine line, because you can have people who just fail to finish anything because maybe they're paralyzed by perfectionism.
Right.
So they feel like they need this thing to be like their magnum opus. Like, it has to be perfection. It has to encompass everything they know. Like, so some people can get to the point where they never complete anything. But I think if you're somebody who is able to finish something, you have evidence that you can see something through to the end. then I think that's fine. I think it's better to just let something go so that you then have time to focus on the next thing you can finish.
Yeah. No, I like that mentality, right? Like, and just letting the thing be what it is, and letting the thing do what it was just meant to do. And it wasn't meant to be a finished song, or it wasn't meant to be a finished painting, but it was meant to help you up your skill in a certain area, or gain clarity in terms of your direction or whatever, or figure out what you don't like. I mean, that's the other thing, right? Like, there's paintings that I've done, I'm like, I really hate this color combo. and it's like, okay, cool, now I know that.
Yeah, you definitely, when you're creating, you can't be afraid to do something you end up hating, because that's great information.
Yeah.
On that note, since we're talking about creativity, let's jump into our discussion about month-long creative challenges. So these are challenges kind of like RPM for musicians, like Inktober. NaNoWriMo is the writing one, the novel writing month. So obviously it's something a lot of people participate in. So there has to be something that, you know, people get out of this. So for anybody who hasn't done this kind of challenge, I'm really curious to see if we can inspire some people to maybe give one of these challenges a try, or to create their own, kind of like what you've done, where you've created your own, you know, painting every day challenge. So I'd actually love to hear, I know you're just a couple weeks into it, but I'd love to hear about your experience with it so far, just to see if it's something you might be interested in doing again in the future.
First of all, I have to say, so I was reviewing our notes for this episode, which I don't have any notes written, and I was looking at yours. You have one bullet. You're like, RPM is amazing and everyone should do it. It made me laugh so hard. Like, okay, enough said. Yeah, because I said this in an earlier episode, like those month-long challenges, or I see them come up, and sometimes I try, but I give up like after 3 days, and but this one that I created for myself, I mean, it's kind of interesting, because it does feel like I'm just going through the motions, and I don't typically, like, when I paint, typically I'm working towards something specific, or I'm inspired by a certain idea. And so this is kind of interesting where it's like, it's just, I'm doing it to check a box, which is a different approach than I'm used to. And it is, I'm doing it because I'm curious to see if by being creative every day, or by the act of creating every day, if I can get myself back into that kind of creative headspace. So I'm trying to see, like, can I walk myself into feeling inspired and lit up? Or is it something I just really do have to wait out and wait for that kind of like spark to hit again? Because I think I've said, and I can't remember if this was something that we talked about in pre-podcast conversations, or if I brought this up in the podcast, but I know that there are people who, like, creatives who would argue that you should always be creating even when you're not feeling inspired. But I don't really feel that way for myself. Like, I only really paint when I feel inspired to do so, or when I'm inspired by a certain idea. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's the approach I have chosen to take. So this challenge is that I've set for myself is actually challenging that idea. And I'm curious. Like, I'm curious to see, like, when I'm done, how am I going to feel about these things that I've created? Will it have been, like, will I feel like it has been worthwhile? Like, will I have learned anything? And do I need to stick to my kind of idea of only painting when I feel inspired or sparked by an idea? Like, or am I comfortable painting and just feeling like I'm going through the motions of painting, sort of thing? So anyways, I haven't really figured that out yet. 2 weeks in, I'm really happy that I'm still doing it.
Yeah, I think it's easy for any kind of a commitment like this to drop off. You kind of get to the 2 week mark. Like, the first week, you're like, yeah. And then the second week, it starts to fizzle. And, you know, I think for a lot of people, by the start of the third week, they're like, oh, I'll try again another time, you know.
I think because I have no expectations from this, like, like, the other challenges, I've seen and that I've tried to do, it's because like a lot of it has to do with like, oh, this will be a great way to get my social media following up because then I can use the hashtags and stuff like that, right? And then so you do it for a bit, but then you see that it's not really having like my expectations of the impact on my following are too high, and you see that doesn't happen, it's not happening for you, and then you kind of lose motivation. Whereas in this case, it's very much like I'm doing this thing to kind of test myself, I guess, in a way. And beyond that, there's no expectations. I'm not even expecting to like any of the stuff I make every day. And it really is just driven by curiosity. And somehow that it's much easier for me to stick with something that is driven by curiosity and exploration versus expectation. I think I'll be successful in finishing the 31 days.
Yeah, I know you will be. I think that's so important what you just said about not having expectations, because that's so true. When you're doing anything for these outside rewards, whatever they happen to be, whether it's more Instagram followers or it's, a product that you're happy with or whatever, it is much easier to become discouraged when you're not seeing those results play out. Whereas if you're doing it out of curiosity, out of a sense of exploration and, maybe being interested in just improving yourself as an artist and challenging, I love what you said about, challenging your ideas about how you create. I think that is probably a much more effective way of being able to see a challenge like this through to the end and to also get something really meaningful out of it. Because all of those other metrics, that we think of when we think in terms of our success as creatives, so much of that is just out of our control.
Yeah.
But to take control of something like your own creative process, that can yield such satisfying results for you in your life. Because for me, creativity is such a fulfilling activity. Just to sit in the act of creating, like there's nothing more fun to me than sitting down and working on a song. Like it's my highest joy by far. I love everything I do musically, but writing a song, anything where I get to put my voice, my musical voice into something, into a song and shape it, like that is the most fun thing to me. So I think if people are coming at it from that angle, looking to find ways to have a more maybe connected relationship with creativity, deeper understanding of their own creativity, I think that would it would be so much easier to stick with. And again, the benefits would run much deeper.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you're saying like the idea of fun. That's fascinating because with me, and I don't know, I would be so curious to hear from other people. Like, does everyone feel like they're having fun when they're creating? Because I actually wouldn't say that. Like, I don't feel, and maybe that's why I need to kind of feel that spark of inspiration to create, because it doesn't give me that necessarily. Like, it doesn't, it does a bit. But I wouldn't say if someone were to ask me, do you have fun while you paint? I wouldn't say yeah. Because I don't.
Interesting.
I don't. It's not like I don't have fun, but I wouldn't say I do. It's I'm like, am I weird? Is that I ask that question every podcast. Am I weird? I basically just need someone to validate me.
Isn't that really the reason why any of us are doing this?
Yeah.
Deep down, we just all desperately want validation. So first of all, again, you're weird for different reasons, but again, your weirdness is fine. It is complimentary to my own, and it's greatly appreciated. But no, I don't think that's weird at all. I think that's just going to be part of your personal creative process. And I think that's, again, the danger in comparing yourself to somebody else. And that's not to say that you can't find that, and maybe that's a place you get to where you are feeling just nothing but fun when you create. But I think as long as you're not, actively hating what you're doing, I think that's fine. I think that's a good sign. And maybe it's more a product of not having thought about it maybe you're so in the maybe just the way you create, you're so into what you're doing that you're not even really feeling anything. You're just because you do very much paint from that source of inspiration, and you improvise as you go. Maybe you're just so involved with that you just don't have the space to think about, well, am I happy now? Am I having fun? Is this a good time? Like, you're just doing it. You're just like overtaken by the creativity.
Well, and circling back to our earlier conversation about values too, it's possible that having fun while creating is not a value I have. It's not something that's important to me. It's not a driving force. Like, I think self-expression is the driving force, and self-expression isn't always a fun process.
That's very true.
So that could be part of it as well. So maybe just because I think, like, when you said, you have fun when you create, it was kind of like almost triggering to me, because I know I've heard people say that before, and I've always felt like, oh, there must be something wrong with me because I'm not connecting in that way. And now thinking through it, I'm like, actually, it's probably very normal. Like, everyone does what they do for different reasons, and they're driven to do things for different reasons. And yeah, so that's kind of cool to have just discovered. So I guess fun while painting is not a value that I hold.
Yeah, and I will definitely say that fun is not the only thing I feel when I create, because I also value self-expression. So I feel like a mix of a lot of things. So I'm sure a lot of the other emotions that I experience while I'm creating are ones that probably overlap with what you experience. But I just, that tends to stand out to me, is just how much fun I'm having bringing something I'm hearing in my head to fruition. But yeah, it's funny because fun is not one of my musical values. Right. I have a lot of fun making music, but I feel like, to me, the reasons why I'm driven to create are much deeper than that. Not that fun isn't deep, and maybe that's something I need to work through, is this idea that, like, fun is the stuff that's all kind of fluffy and up here, and like all the stuff, like the self-improvement, the self-expression, the, service, all of those things are like the real things. No, I think fun is very, very real too. I was having this discussion with a student this week as I was trying to help them figure out their musical values, and one of them was very clearly fun.
Right.
I think that is what it comes down to, is knowing what your values are and what drives you, and knowing that it's completely fine, and that it probably will shift, as we talked about last week. Your values are probably going to shift and evolve as your, voice as an artist changes, as your life changes, and all of that. So
yeah, this is all really interesting, because I'm just taking a note here, because it's like fun, you wouldn't necessarily say fun is a value, but it's a byproduct for you of creativity. Yeah. Whereas for me, 100%. it's not a byproduct, which really helps explain why I have such a hard time, like after a long, draining day at work, why I have such a hard time to go and paint. And it's like, because fun isn't a byproduct of me creating. And so it's not something that's going to help make me feel better. That's not quite true. I mean, it does in a way, but it's not something that's going to make me feel like, I'm not going to paint and be like, oh, I feel like I've had fun. Like, that's helped relieve my stress. Like, it can sometimes, but not all the time. It's not a consistent byproduct. And so now it's like, okay, well, that explains why I can have a hard time to push myself to do it.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee that you're going to feel relief at the end of it.
Right.
And so that makes it less appealing to you as an after work activity, because your work is so draining.
Right. Great. This is great. This has given me lots of clarity.
Amazing.
Yay.
And that's from only 2 weeks into a challenge. I think that's pretty impressive.
Well, I don't know if I would have had that clarity if we weren't having this conversation, but
so 2 weeks and then a conversation.
Yeah,
that's pretty
2 weeks
good.
and a conversation.
takes a lot of people a lot longer than that.
Yeah, I guess it's not so bad. Yeah, so, and I'm super curious, because you're a big fan of RPM. I'm actually curious, like, have you done other challenges as well, or is this kind of the first one that you've done? I mean, this is the first sort of challenge that you've done.
I think this is the only one I can think of in the moment.
Right.
If I've done any others, they weren't significant enough for them to be at the forefront of my mind right now. Yeah, and I'll add an addendum if I think of any others, but I think this is it. And I think the reason I keep coming back to this one is because it's been so profoundly life-changing for me.
Right.
So I guess I'll give a little bit of RPM backstory. And again, to anybody who's not sure what RPM stands for, it's Record Production Month. And it's this challenge that happens every year in February where you are tasked with creating original music. So you write and you record and you produce. And they have different challenges that you can sign up for. So you can do just a single song. You can do an EP, which is usually what I do. Or you could do a full-length album. I think they also offer like a box set. And there's like different criteria you have to meet for each one. It's in terms of the number of tracks or the amount of time for the full project. And I was introduced to RPM by Courtney Swain. And anybody who doesn't know who Courtney Swain is, I would ask you to not walk, but to sprint to your nearest listening device and go listen to the band Bent Knee, and then go listen to Courtney's solo material. And, Courtney has all these other collaborations with other incredible musicians too. So do yourselves a favor and go check out Courtney Swain and Bent Knee. I've been part of Courtney's Patreon for a while now, and back in 2020, they did an extra RPM challenge just because of the pandemic. And she had said, I'm going to be doing this and I'm going to be sharing like on Patreon each day, like my progress and all of that. And I thought, oh, that'd be really cool. I just got an Ableton like a month before. So I was starting to play around with that. And I thought, oh, this would be a great way to, get a jump on it. I did not succeed. It wasn't the right time. I was, still trying to keep my massive like practice schedule through the day, and I was trying to write in the evenings. It just was not very effective. So it just wasn't the right time. One song, as I've mentioned before, I really liked that I had started and is actually going to be on my full-length album. So it's a partial success in that I got a song that ultimately launched my album. But 2021 was my first official RPM attempt and success. I wrote an album called Words of Winter, and my intention with that project was to push myself and challenge myself and to just kind of see if I could do it. So a lot of that was curiosity. There's also a lot of anxiety. I'm very much a perfectionist, and I'm doing much better these days, but it was still at a time when the thought of sharing something with the world that wasn't perfect was very stressful to me. Mm-hmm. But I knew I needed to start doing something just to, see a project through to the end, or to some kind of end, and to put it out there. I knew I needed to do that. And so with Courtney's encouragement and, the other patrons who were involved, we got together and a bunch of us, made these albums. And it was just a really intense experience and really wonderful and amazing. I came away with like 7 new songs in this EP. Like, I'd never written that many songs. As I mentioned earlier, my songwriting process used to be quite a bit slower. Like, I'd kind of work on one and it'd kind of take me a while to get, another one. So this was the first time I had that experience of that kind of focus of creation, and just, I did it. And I felt pretty confident after my first day when I came up with a loop that became my first song for that album. I was like, okay, I'm fine. So there was a lot of self-doubt, I think, through that experience, but a lot of that was alleviated because I did it.
Yeah.
And I was really happy with the songs too, which was such a concern. I wasn't sure if I was going to like them. And that was something you had mentioned earlier about having that expectation about having something you like. And, and I had to try to abandon some of that. But ultimately, I was really pleased with what I came up with. I felt like it was a good representation of who I was at the time. It started to dip a little bit into the musician I knew I was becoming. And so it was just, it was a really incredible experience. And I had picked a theme for that year too. So the theme being winter. The idea being that if I had a focal point to focus on, if I had something to kind of just guide my attention, it would help me create rather than being like, I can create anything. And it was super helpful. So I've taken that approach with me through every RPM. I always have something in mind for each one. So 2022, my goal was to write another EP, but to have it just be written for acoustic guitar and vocals. And I really struggled with that one. I really didn't want to do it because the acoustic and vocal limitation was so far removed from the stuff I had been working on. So at this point, I already had a few songs under my belt for my full-length album, and I had this sound I was developing that I felt like I really wanted to keep working on. So it was actually really challenging to do this, the challenge in 2022. I also had the idea for it. I wrote an album called Grounded, and I had that idea for an album title, which also helped. So I did get it done. I think I could have done better if I had a little bit more of a fire lit under me right from the get-go. But 2 weeks into that challenge, I started reading Cal Newport's Deep Work, and that changed everything. So the last 2 weeks were super productive because I just got that fire I'd lacked just from reading the introduction to Deep Work. So again, it was really helpful to have that focus. I got 6 songs. And again, I don't think it was my best work, but I'm glad I did it. And I'm ultimately happy with the songs I have. And they're ones I'm going to be revisiting at some point. I'd like to record them properly. Like, you know, at some point I'd like to upgrade, get a really nice acoustic, go into a studio, record them properly, and then do a proper release. Because I think the songs are, like, they have potential. But anyways, 2023. So I had this idea, and it was based on this exercise I had started doing at the tail end of 2022, where I was finding these producers on YouTube who were doing like walkthroughs. This one guy in particular, he was doing like he does this series called Inspired By, I think his name is Will Hatton or something like that. He does this series called Inspired By, where he'll create a track in Ableton inspired by a particular artist. So he had a few of these, and what I did was I followed along, and this was just an idea I had because I was just trying to get some production ideas. And he had a video demonstrating, you know, some of the production techniques of an electronic artist I'm really into. And I was watching, I'm like, it would be really fun if I just followed along and did all the things he did, but I just make my own track. So I had a new track I had like my own tempo and key, and I played my own parts in, but I followed along. So if he like started with a kick, I would like bring in a kick. If he then added a synth, I would add a synth, but cool. I would do a line. So yeah, and I had so much fun. So I have a bunch of these little like short compositions I made based on this series that he has. And it was so much fun. And that's where I got the idea, and probably in December, where I thought, okay, well, this artist I love named Jordan Rakai, he's like my main guy right now. He did this series in 2021, I think. It was a live stream series called A Song From Nothing. And he did 7 of these. He would live stream himself just making a song from start to finish. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I did an album where I followed that same process, where I use his songs as a blueprint, but I make my own songs? Right. So what I did through December and January was I watched all of his videos and I took notes. I have this whole setup in Notion where I had like the video and I did all these notes with like timestamps. So, you know, for like the first song, he started with the drums, he got the hi-hats, and then he did the kick and then the snare. So I did the same thing, but I think I maybe took the same tempo for a couple of the songs, but I found the first couple of songs I wrote were sounding a little bit, I felt like I kept leaning too much on what he was doing. So some of them went way off. I changed time signatures. I changed all these things. So, but the process was basically the same for all of them, where I followed the blueprint and I just made my own song. Yeah. And I'm so glad I decided to do that, because this album in particular pushed me beyond anything else ever could have. It was, I saw the transformation of myself as a songwriter and producer like immediately after. Like it was like night and day for me. That's what it feels like anyways. Just how, and I can see it now in how I approach my songs. So in the song I mentioned at the start of the episode that I went back to work on, a lot of the stuff I changed and added was stuff I learned from doing that challenge. Right. So it's definitely shaped me as an artist, and I so appreciate that. And I love the songs that I got out of it. I think it's some of my best work, and I'm still excited about the songs on it. And I'm working with a couple of them. As I mentioned before, I'm doing a kind of a performance thing that's still sort of a little secret right now, but it's something I've been working on the last year, taking a couple of these songs and turning them into something else that's been really fun and fulfilling. And so I got so much out of it, but I will say that last year's challenge drained me completely. And that is one thing to keep in mind for anybody who hasn't done this kind of challenge before. It is all consuming. I remember dreaming about RPM before I started my first one. Like I would have dreams leading up to it where I was doing RPM. It was like all I could think about.
It's a huge project. Like it's a massive project for it to fit into a month. And it's like incredible what you're able to accomplish within that month. That I love what you did last year. Like I love, because it was basically like you were, and I love this concept that you can have, it's creative prompts essentially, right? Where it's like you're following the prompts
100%.
that someone else has drawn out or whatever, but what you end up with is different. And I love that idea. And I did a little series of paintings where I did like a line of paint and a line of, like it all started the same, but every painting ended up different because it's all about the choices you make, right? So like the base is the same, but it's just that for each painting I made a different choice as that first mark, and then the second mark was a different choice, and the third mark was so. And that concept of like the amount of songs you're able to make, or paintings you're able to make, or stories you're able to tell from the same root is such an amazing thing to think about, right? Like you could have the same plot, like same plot points, and tell a million different stories from those same plot points. And that concept has always been fascinating. So I remember you telling me like your concept for last year's RPM, and I was like, that is super cool.
Yeah, and I love that idea of having, multiple creations starting from that exact same point. Like I might try that at some point.
Yes.
I think that sounds really fun.
Yeah, like you start like the same, like, I don't know, with music, I don't know if it'd be like the same note or like the same instrument or something, right? But then you're like deviating as you go. And the album, like it's kind of cool because like your RPM challenges are like, it's like kind of like a timestamp, right, on like your musical journey. And so it must be really interesting to kind of listen back on the stuff you've created and like sort of see your evolution. And like yours last year was particularly cool because you were doing a lot of really, and I'm not a musician by any means, so like I don't have an appreciation for the fine details, but I was like, oh, there's lots of really interesting things going on here musically. I can't fully appreciate or define what those are, but I know that there's something cool going on here.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, from the get-go, I really appreciated how well you received the album. And I remember sitting down with you last year and like showing you some of the stuff I had put into the songs and was breaking it down. And yeah, I really appreciate that you're taking note of the fact that there are a lot of details, because I think that's definitely one of the things I picked up that is making my songs sound way better. It's just all those little things, those little tiny elements that if they weren't there, you'd really miss them. But you might not even realize they're fully there. It's just like if they went away. And this is how I check something to make sure I'm not adding something that doesn't really need to be there. Is I'll mute it, and if my ear wants to hear that part come in, I'll keep it in. If I feel like it's not adding anything, I'll take it out, but that's always the test, is like, do I miss it when it's not there?
This is it's really interesting, because I remember, now I remember remembering us talking about your music at length, and I remember thinking it's really fascinating because there's similarities between what you're doing in music to what I see sort of abstract artists doing, where they're really like, you'll see, because some of the artists I follow do like work in progress pics, and they'll be starting with a layer, and then the next photo, it's the painting looks completely different, but there's still that layer has been covered up by other colors, but you still sense it there, even though you hardly even see it. And it's sort of similar to what you're doing, like you're kind of layering different elements, but but you still kind of sense that, like, you may not hear it super, it may not be very prominent, but you can still feel that kind of like underlayer of a different kind of musical style or whatever. And like, you're also like, I feel like you're in a really creative zone where you're mixing musical sounds. And I think that's because in my mind, I think of like mixing textures. So it's
right.
It's really fascinating where you're at with music, because I feel like I can like equate it to visual art more than I could before. So it's really neat. And you're thinking outside the box, I think, which is cool to see.
Yeah, and I think I'm really trying to take the whole, this being a challenge thing very seriously, in that I'm trying to challenge
Push
myself
yourself
each year.
Yeah.
So that I'm not just doing it just to get it done. Like, I want to come out at the other end, and again, not just have songs that I'm happy with. That's like a bonus. But if I come out a better songwriter and a better producer and a more thoughtful artist, that to me that's the victory.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that this year more than any others, where I'm just coming at my songs from a totally different place. And I think this is the artist that I sort of saw myself becoming when I mentioned a few episodes ago about this one song I wrote that gave me a glimpse into the artist I was going to become. I feel like this is it coming together. Like, it took a couple of years and it took a couple of RPMs, but I feel like I'm at a point where all of those elements are coming together in a way that feels like something that's very unique to me, but that's very exciting and feels like I'm pushing myself.
Yeah.
Always. Like, just I constantly feel like I'm improving just a little bit each day.
This is really cool, because when we started this episode and you're like, well, when you pitched this episode idea, I was kind of like, oh, month-long challenges. Like, I just don't buy into them. I just don't get them. And I think I didn't really get them because I always saw them as like just another thing I had to do. And the way you're kind of framing it is like, this is an opportunity. And I'm kind of reframing it in my mind now. And I'm kind of getting excited, because it's like, this is an opportunity for you the royal you, to push yourself out of your box and to get creative and to try new things and to experiment and to play. Like, you're kind of embracing that element of the challenge. And I was like, oh, that's actually, like, when you put it that way, I'm like, oh, that'd be really fun, where it's like a month where like your whole goal here is to like forget everything you've kind of done, like forget how you've painted in the past, and your whole goal is to challenge yourself and push yourself and to really force yourself to play and to experiment. And like, framed that way, I'm like, oh, I could see there's a lot of potential for growth and learning through that, versus the way I had framed it earlier, where it's like, oh, it's just a thing that I have to do every day, and then like check that off the box and now I can feel proud of myself. Switch the framing and it's like, oh no, this has like, I see the point now.
Yeah, and I wonder then how much of a difference there would be for you if you did a challenge where, instead of having it be that you're painting every day, have it be that you have some specific, maybe you want to do 3 to 4 paintings by the end of a month.
Right.
And they're driven by whether it's a creative prompt or it's some kind of a personal challenge or whatever it is. Because I find, I ultimately end up working on RPM every single day through the month. But because it's always in service of this sort of bigger thing, I don't know, it feels like any one day is not as significant as just the collection of the time I spend within that month. Because I inevitably will have some days that'll be busier and I won't be able to spend as much time. I don't know, I'm thinking in terms of, just how you frame the challenge, and if there's some sort of something a little more concrete at the end, or something that feels a little more enticing maybe than just doing it every day.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe that would be something to try.
Yeah, like I think that would work, like you have like the goal is to create 6 paintings, and I like the idea of like challenges that have restrictions. It's like you can only use like these 3 pigments, or you can't use paintbrushes, or like things like that kind of force you to approach it in a different way. Or like using different, like some sort of creative challenge that uses different materials than what you usually use. Because I think like sometimes like limitations can be helpful. And like in your case, like limitation in terms of time limitation, like which can probably be extremely helpful, because it prevents you, like you're basically doing an album in a month. you don't have that time to overthink anything. Like, you're really having to work on instinct.
100% true.
And that whole perfectionism is kind of out the window, because you're not going to have time to like make it perfect before you launch it. You could always refine afterwards, I guess, but and even that, like, having that kind of time restriction can be really helpful, and there can be some really interesting things that come out of that.
You raise a really important point, which is that my brain kind of shuts off through February. I'm almost not entirely aware of what's happening. Actually, I'm gonna say the thing I had thought of, but then I want to share a journal entry from last year.
Ooh.
That's very funny.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Just to show you the kind of headspace I get into through February. Maybe perhaps as a warning.
Are we going to continue our podcast through February?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Because I'm gonna do weekly updates. It just might get a little weird.
Oh, this is awesome! I'm so excited.
I might not be fully aware of what I'm saying, so it'll be a good time. It'll be interesting.
That's been like how I've felt the last since we started the podcast. So between the two of us, it's going to be really interesting. Okay.
Oh yeah. Buckle up, folks. So no, the time crunch, and you're absolutely right. It really has forced me to just focus on, and this is one of the other challenges I give myself, is to make the best thing I can for that moment in time. And which ties into what you were saying earlier about it being really something that is, it's like a time capsule. Like, you can see my progress. You can hear how much I improve as I go. And that's going to be true always. There are always going to be limitations. There are always going to be weaknesses. I'm always going to have areas where I need to improve, but I don't want to anymore. I did that for years. I don't want to anymore let myself use that as an excuse to not finish something and not see it through.
Right.
Because I've grown, and I know this too. Like, I since having these projects, out there, I've just seen what it's done for my growth. All those years of practicing and grinding and all of that, they really needed a project to be focused into, to really push everything to the next level. So I remember this from coming out of my first RPM, where I was worried that because I hadn't been able to practice guitar like I usually do, that I would be, I would get back into practicing in March and just, have to play catch up. That was not the case at all. I was a better guitar player at the end of RPM because I think I had had that time to do something different and to because I still played guitar, I just did it within the context of this project. So all of that practicing really, it got a chance to flourish while I was not only resting from that kind of intense practicing, but creating during that time.
Right.
So it pushed me further. That's how I feel about last year's too. Where I feel this sort of confidence in my guitar playing I haven't had before. And that came at the tail end of RPM. And just really feeling things I'd been practicing come together. And I just don't see it coming together in the same way when I'm just practicing. Because when I'm practicing, my intention is to work on the things I'm still not good enough at.
Right.
I'm still trying to focus. Whereas doing a project, doing an album is more like a celebration of how far I've come and the tools I have. And yes, there is a pushing forward and a challenging of myself and reaching for more. But there is an invitation still to bring the best parts of myself to that. So I would be a much worse musician if I hadn't done these last 3 challenges. Even though it means that I have a month where I'm just not practicing the way I do, if at all.
Right.
This year, basically, my approach is going to be to do my vocal practice still, because my voice is far less forgiving than my guitar playing.
Right.
I can go a bit longer without playing or practicing guitar, and I still feel like it's there. But my voice, I got to stay on top of because I'm going to be tracking vocals too. But the guitar, I'm probably not going to practice guitar at all in February. I'm just going to use guitar playing for the album just to make sure I'm doing the best I can. That was actually a big shift from, going from last year compared to, the first couple of years where I was still trying to bring some of my practicing in. So I'd practice in the morning and then I would, after that, do the RPM thing. 2023, all I did was RPM. And it made a huge difference.
Yeah.
Just focus on that.
I can see that because practicing versus playing, playing as part of a song and working on a song, it's a different kind of, I'd imagine, a different kind of mindset. And it's almost like with something like where you have a limited amount of time, you have to do this thing in a month. It's almost like you don't want to waste any time, because it takes, I'm thinking like with when I'm working and when I'm focusing, right? If I get like an email or a text, I get distracted, and then it takes my brain quite some time to get back into that focus state and into that like work mindset, right? And I feel like that might be the same, where it's like you're practicing and then you have to shift into a different mindset for the actual like creating the song part, and it's like wasted time almost when you don't have a lot of time to play with here. So it's like, let's just get rid of the practicing, forget about that for the month, and then just focus all that energy on the creating.
Yeah, and 100%, you know, and I think part of why I clung to the practicing my first RPM, it just came from that insecurity. And that was something I've talked about before, where part of the reason I practiced so hard is because I just was not confident in my playing and my abilities, and I felt like I wasn't good enough. And if I wasn't grinding and trying to get, you know, to be the best out there, that I would be, you know, found out. It's the whole like imposter syndrome thing. I mean, I still worked a lot on the actual RPM album in 2021. So like I'm glad for what I got out of it, but the difference in quality between 2021 and 2023. 2022, again, I struggled through that one. I was still doing some practicing, of course, and some stuff like that, but like the actual writing of the album, I had a lot of resistance. So like it just wasn't my best work just because of the headspace I was in. And really just the last couple of weeks, thankfully I was able to get it together. But 2023, I really took it seriously, and it shows. And it makes me, I think it makes me want to be more like that just in my musical life always, you know, and it's made me question, you know, how much am I splitting my focus in a way that's not serving me? Because, you know, I have like right now I have this album that I want to get done, and like where am I maybe potentially doing it a disservice? And maybe I'm not, but it's something I have to ask myself. Where am I maybe doing it a disservice by trying to split my attention in too many different musical areas?
Right.
Which, you know, for me, it's always going to be not a battle, but it's going to be a matter of finding a way to balance the part of me that still needs to practice, because I'm a professional musician. It's just a part of my job. But I also want to, because I want to get better. I know there's still improvement to be made, and I never want to stop improving. I never want to stop growing. And practicing, that really high quality, deliberate practice is a really important part of that. But I also, and you're right, like the headspace you have to be in to practice versus creating, like, you know, you have a limited amount of that really strong cognitive attention in a single day. And so I have to be mindful about where I'm dividing that attention. Right. I mean, for me personally, creating like working on music, just creating it is not nearly as cognitively demanding as practicing. And that's just because of the nature of like learning hard things, versus for me, for creating it is still something I'd consider deep work. Like songwriting is part of my deep work, but it's different. So I can do a lot more of that. But definitely if I've taxed my brain at the start of the day by doing really heavy duty practicing, which is fine when I'm just working on something that has a longer time scale. Yeah. But when I only got a month, I really, and this is all stuff I've learned since spring 2022. This is all stuff I didn't understand before. Now I have a better understanding of how my mind works and how the brain works. And so I'm much more respectful of my, you know, my cognitive limit for the day. And so I think that was part of it too, is just do less, but do it better.
Yeah. When you were saying like, you know, you've been thinking about how you split your attention, like, do you mean like what do you mean by that? Like, what are the things that you've kind of divided your attention on? Like, you're talking like instruments kind of specifically, or just, I'm just curious about that.
Oh yeah. And that's more, it's about the practicing. So all the things I'm trying to juggle in terms of practicing.
Okay.
Right
Gotcha.
now.
Yeah.
Because right now my main creative focus is just my album, and then again, RPM will just be a singular event. And I'm working on this performance thing too, but that's sort of like straddles the line between practicing and creativity, because I've already created the songs. I'm just practicing them for this like performance thing I'm doing. So that doesn't feel like too much at this point. But Yeah, and this is something I feel like I'm probably always going to struggle with is, am I trying to juggle too much on the practice front? And I've gotten a lot better. You should see the stuff I tried to work on, even just a few years ago. I tried to do so many things at the same time, but I've really whittled that down. So I'm better about it, and I try to be more critical when I invite something new into my practice regimen, but it's something I do have to stay on top of. And I think right now part of the pressure is just because it's January and I know I'm going to get a cutoff. So I'm trying not to get too into anything. So I'm feeling a little bit of tension there, just as I feel like there are all these things I want to do, but I have to be careful about where I put my focus for the rest of the month, because I have to get some things I have to sort of get to a certain point before then February happens, and then I have to put it all aside. So yeah, it's an ongoing battle for me in trying not to stretch myself too thin. And it comes from a place, like, I'm very glad to be somebody who's interested in so many things, but it does get in the way, because then I'm going not as far in all these different directions rather than taking one or two things and then really moving them forward, which again is the experience of RPM has helped me see that.
Yeah. But it's also tough too in your case, because it's like, you have these different, like, you're not just a guitar player. Like, you play piano, you play drums. Well, you're not doing the drums right now, but knowing those things like, they all have a role to play in your music making too, though, right? So you can't really cut them out. Like, you still need to work them in somehow, and you still need to stay up on your skills in those areas, because they do have a part to play in what you're doing creatively.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of the tension right now, is knowing that there's really nothing I can drop that I'm working on currently.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, because I've talked about my big three. So guitar, vocals and then singing or songwriting / production. Those kind of go hand in hand. So that's where the mixing comes in later in the year in Q2, when I want to get mixing lessons, just to help give my songs that polish that I feel like I want the demos to have, and just to have that skill too, because it'll be valuable in many other areas of my career. But yeah, and so this is getting maybe a little bit off topic, and can be something I'll sort of give an update on when we do our. Actually, I thought maybe what I'll do is a quarterly update, sort of give a quick at the end of each quarter. Just because I'm trying to structure my year that way.
Yeah.
For the first time. So I'll talk about it more then. But anyways, yeah, it's RPM has definitely let me see the power of really focusing on one thing singularly. But it's also, a month ultimately is not that long. It's one thing if I was taking 6 months off.
Yeah.
And not practicing, that would be a problem.
Right.
But for 1 month, considering how much I do practice normally, it ends up being better for my musicianship. I come out way better on the other side, because ultimately too, that's the thing I'm doing. I'm putting all this work into my practicing and getting better because I want to channel it all into the music I'm making. I want to be able to make the best music I possibly can. And it was easy for me to lose sight of that for a lot of years, especially before I actually had the songwriting. But even once I had the songwriting, it was like this kind of extra thing I tried to fit on top of the practicing, and it just, I wasn't giving it the attention it really deserved. And I feel like RPM gives me permission to do that.
Yeah.
And again, it's just what it's done for my songwriting and for my confidence too as a creator. It's like, I just can't say enough. And this is why that was my one note for the episode, was that it's amazing and everyone should do it, because you really come to know who you are and what you're capable of doing. Like, I've proven it now 3 times. I can write an EP in a month.
Right.
I can do it. I can write music I'm actually really happy with.
Right.
To the point where last year's is some of the best music I've ever created. Like, that's huge. And there's this quote from Seneca that goes, I feel sorry for anyone who hasn't faced a challenge because they don't know what they're capable of. That's not the exact quote, but it's that kind of sentiment. And that's what this was making me think of as I was thinking about this yesterday. I think just to have evidence of what you're capable of doing, I think that's one of the best values of these challenges is just because you don't know.
Right.
You know, and then when you do it and you're faced with this, what at first is going to feel like a very overwhelming challenge, when you succeed, or you succeed in some way, whatever that definition is for each person, then you suddenly, other things that seem scary don't seem so scary anymore.
Yeah.
Don't seem so unfathomable. You go, well, I mean, this thing seemed impossible, but I did it.
Right.
And so, yeah, for me, it's helped me to accumulate all this evidence of what I'm actually capable of doing, because I'm somebody who can be full of a lot of self-doubt.
Yes.
And again, the imposter syndrome and all of that. And, you know, I think that's pretty universal for most creative people, is we all have those doubts about ourselves. You know, it's one thing to have, like, it's nice to get encouragement from other people, but there's something about being able to see yourself, like that evidence yourself, to be able to hold in your hands something you've created, or to hear something you've created and go, I did that.
Right.
That to me has been great.
A really interesting point. It is like it's giving yourself the opportunity to prove yourself to yourself. I just said yourself a lot there. But within a sort of structured program, or whatever you want to call it, with built-in accountability too, right?
Yes.
So you're setting yourself up for success to prove yourself to yourself. Yeah, it's a really great point.
Yeah. So you just offered a key word, which is accountability.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have seen any of them through. Certainly not the first one. Once I had the first one, I knew I could do it. But the first one, having the support of Courtney and all of Courtney's Patreon patrons, that was so helpful. And that was, 2022 wasn't so much, but 2023 we were really involved, where we were having meetings like once a week and sharing our work, and that makes the whole experience. Yeah, it makes a huge difference in just seeing it through to the end, but also it makes the experience itself really fun.
Yeah.
And this is, again, part of what helped me recognize that collaboration is actually one of my musical values, because being able to, and this was like not collaborating in the sense that we were creating anything together, although that's something we're doing this year in Courtney's Patreon, which will be really fun. But, you know, it was just having other people be involved in the process in some way, shape, or form.
Yes.
And to get that encouragement and then get the feedback, which for me has been really helpful too. I think that was a big element of what helped me improve, is that I got feedback, and I took that feedback seriously, and I used it to make my stuff better.
Yes.
And my music is way better because and that was another area where I was really weak on for years, because I was so resistant to sharing, because it was so tied to like my self-worth. And so if something wasn't perfect, then, you know, I felt terrible. And I've had to unlearn that. And I've really come to appreciate the value of getting feedback in terms of how much better it can make your finished product, which is why I want to, you know, do my full album with a producer and hire a mixing engineer and a mastering engineer, like do it properly, because I recognize the value of other people being involved in that process.
It's such a cool thing too, to have a group around you while you're in the process of creating too. It's like somewhat like sounding boards, right? People to like, you can bounce creative ideas off of each other, and also hearing what they're doing can spark ideas. And so like, I love, like when I was doing my, the script writing program, that was the part that I loved the most, was like when we were critiquing each other's work, or like bouncing story ideas off of each other, and like seeing how your idea could like morph and evolve based off of like feedback from other people, or ideas that are sparked by comments or whatever. And I love that with art too. Like I haven't sat in on a lot of like art critiques, but I always find them really, really fascinating, because it's not about tearing you down, right? That's not the goal.
Not at all.
It shouldn't be. And if you're in a situation where you're being torn down, get out, because that's not the way it should be. It really is about kind of like someone else externally, maybe giving you a little push in a different direction, or maybe questioning a certain choice. And in some cases, what's really cool about that, in some cases, when your choice is questioned by someone else, you're either going to be like, no, how dare you? Like, this is how I want it to be. In which case, you know, like that's authentically, like that is your choice. And other times you're going to be kind of like, there's gonna be that part of you that feels really crap because you know that what they're calling you out on is correct. But it's just something that you don't want to have to fix or address yourself. So it's like, oh, I hate that you noticed that thing because I was trying to ignore it because I know it needs to be fixed, but I just don't have the energy to address it right now. But yeah, that's super cool. I didn't realize that there was that kind of, like, I assumed there was a community around it, but I didn't realize it was that tight and like that involved, which is really neat.
Yeah, so there is an RPM community on Discord that's very active. They're active all year long because they started what they call the REM challenge, which is record every month.
Oh, wow.
And so it's like where people will record, like, it's RPM but smaller. It's like one song.
Right. Okay.
And then we have full RPM in February. But that Discord is very active. And so I do like to go and I don't actually post anything here, but I'll go and lurk there.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny, you know, the last couple of days of the challenge where people are all posting about, you know, I'm up late finishing my last track. And like, you know, there's something about doing it together. And it's very much, that's what RPM is. It's this big communal activity.
Yeah.
You know that you're not the only one doing it.
Yeah.
So I interact personally with Courtney and with all of the people in Patreon. And so that is very tight knit. Like, we're all in it together. And there's that sense, like, we have our little group. But on a broader scale, there's that sense like, look at all these other people who are creating. And then at the end of the challenge, you can go and see a map of all the different people all over the world who have done this challenge.
I wish there was something like this for art, and maybe there is, and I should look, because I love, like, as you're saying, like, I miss that, again, I had that in script writing where you're all kind of like, well, I guess you kind of have that in school generally when you're all cramming for an exam or whatever. And I do miss that kind of camaraderie.
Yeah.
Like, you're kind of in the trenches together. And even though you're not physically together, you know, there's an excitement there almost.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, it sounds really cool. Maybe I should do RPM. Imagine.
You
I know 3 guitar chords.
There's no reason why you can't. And you know what? You could make a lot with 3 chords. You know, you just get creative with it. Or I can always teach you a 4th, and then, you know, then you're really going. But I mean, you do RPM with me in the sense that you do my cover art.
Yeah.
So technically, so for everybody listening, this podcast is not our first collaboration. Robyn did the art for my first 3 RPM albums and will be doing for all of my albums going forward. Unless we have some horrible falling out, we don't see that happening.
That'd be really awkward.
Yeah. I think we'll be good. But yeah, so actually I'm curious to know what that process is like for you, you know, because you know, writing creating a cover for an album, like what is that like for you?
You know, well, I've only done it for you, and it's lucky because it just so happens that the themes of your albums seem to align with where I'm at with my art. So
amazing.
Like, Grounded was like, that was kind of cool because I was actually at the time I was doing a course in Impressionism painting, and I felt like I was kind of like building the foundation of, like, building some of the foundations that I sort of skipped over being a self-taught artist. And in a way kind of felt like I was grounding myself in my art practice. So
I love
it just kind of aligned. And what was the name of the last year's again?
It was called Songs from Nothing.
That's right. And that was perfect because at the time I was doing these really, I was working with high flow acrylics, and they were very abstract and very kind of intuitive. And I would just sort of like put some paint on some paper, like do like a couple lines of different colors, and then I would just take water and just kind of like swish some water over, and then the paint would kind of bleed into the water, and it kind of just went. So it was like, and it felt like I was creating something from nothing. Like, that's kind of how that's kind of what I thought of it. And so when you had told me the album cover or album title, I was like, oh yeah, that kind of works with like just the method that I'm using for art right now. So it just seems to have kind of aligned nicely. But I do try to like tie the theme of your album to like the approach that I use to paint. But like also like there's some strong imagery there too, like Grounded, like you had sort of the idea of doing like a foresty type thing, which was perfect because that's right up my alley. And then like Songs of Winter, it's like a winter scene would be great, like something quiet and like so there's some like just like the titles that you've come up with have kind of helped sort of, there's like some built-in parameters almost, right, around just based on the title of the album. Yeah, and then like listening to the songs too is helpful, but I'm not like a skilled album artist by any means. I just think it's been just a lucky coincidence that things have just aligned between the two of us.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the album covers you did are amazing and are comparable to any other album cover out there. Is that something you would be interested in doing for other people? Like if another artist reached out asking for an album cover?
I think so.
An avenue you're interested in exploring?
Yeah, I'm interested in anything. Like, I think it just, for me, like, it's nice working with you because I know you aren't going to be, like, it's not like you have something super, super specific in mind. And I think that's where it becomes challenging, and that becomes challenging for commissions too, where it's if the client has something super specific, and then it's like you do the thing, and it's like they call, and then it's like, no, I want this slightly changed, and I want this slightly. It's like, that becomes really hard. So I'd be willing to work with anyone who, like, they have a concept, but they're also totally happy with me, like, taking my approach and putting my kind of artistic vision on it. But I'm not someone who's skilled. Like, if you have something super specific in mind, I'm not your person, right? Like, then go to a graphic designer or another artist, because I need that. Just my way of creating, I need that freedom to be experimental. And particularly with my abstract stuff, I don't have complete control because I'm painting with a medium that does its own thing. And like we've talked about, like, I'm improvising as I go. So if you're needing something super specific, like, I just don't have that control over my medium to be able to give that to you.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I like about working with you is that I don't have to think about it. Like, again, for the first couple albums, I had a kind of a rough idea. But for Songs from Nothing, I had nothing.
Right.
But I always know that whatever you come up with is going to be great. So I feel like it's so great every year to have been able to just know that you were on board and that I didn't have to think about it. Like, It wasn't one more thing for me to think about. I just knew that it was going to be perfect when it was done. That's actually been really helpful.
Last year's was really fun too, because I'm like, this is perfect. This aligns with what I'm doing right now. And the way that I was working at that time, like, each painting I did was very quick too. So I was able to do, like, I gave you a few different options. I think I did like three different paintings. Is like, which one do you like? Yeah. Which one resonates with you? And I think that's the approach I would take if I was doing it with other artists. It's like, okay, I'll come up with like 3 concepts. You choose the one you like, sort of thing. Because then it gives me that, like, I'm not precious about anything, right? It really gives me that complete freedom, because it's like I'm sure they'll like at least one of these things.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So actually, on that note, I should talk about my plans for this year's RPM.
Yeah,
because actually, my idea is going to span the next 3 RPMs. So there's a little bit of backstory here. So for RPM 2023, for Songs from Nothing, a lot of my songs, sort of coincidentally, ended up being about Stoicism. So for anybody who is into Stoicism, if you go and listen to Songs from Nothing, you're going to pick out some key concepts. Some of them are a little more vague than others. They're kind of about myself and my relationship to my life and my struggles, but some of them are like about specific Stoic ideas. And I had a lot of fun. And that just kind of happened by accident with one of the songs I was working on. One of the production techniques I used had me recording just like a bunch of words. I was sort of like improvising a vocal melody with some words, and I just needed some words to sing. So I grabbed Seneca's Letters from a Stoic and was just singing like words from that.
Oh, cool.
And it sounded really cool, just the way it got manipulated after, and it kind of gave me an idea of like, I can use this as my basis for my lyrics, because I had no other idea. With Words of Winter and Grounded, I had more of a theme for the lyrics, whereas for Songs from Nothing, I didn't. So once I had that was really helpful as well. So I actually had the idea last year to do like another EP. I thought, you know what I'd really like to do is like release more music So I'm going to like make another EP. And then I had this idea of doing like another Stoicism EP, like make it specifically about that, because part of what I like about that process is that it gives me an opportunity to also kind of practice my philosophy, because that's what Stoicism is really about. It's like a beautiful practical philosophy. It's something you use in your life. And so having these songs gave me some sort of my own little like reminders of what it is I'm practicing. So I thought, oh, let's take it to that next level, and I'll, take some of these other concepts and I'll make like an album about that. And so I had this idea to do actually like a 3-part album, but I ended up scrapping that idea because I realized, again, I was just stretching myself too thin, and I really just wanted to focus on my full-length album. But that idea was still kicking around. I'm like, I still think it's a viable idea. So as I was thinking about what to do for this year's, and I knew I wanted to do less, I wanted to do fewer songs, I kind of came back to this idea, and I thought, actually, the way that this album is going to be structured, the 3 parts of it are going to be 4 songs each. Like 4 is perfect.
Right.
So here's the idea. In this book, in the Daily Stoic, Daily Meditations, it's actually broken up. So this book has like a meditation for each day. So it'll have a quote from one of the Stoics, and then it'll have a breakdown from Ryan Holiday. He kind of talks about the idea, all of that, how you can apply it. But it's actually broken down into 3 parts. 3 different disciplines of Stoicism. So there's the discipline of perception, the discipline of action, and the discipline of will.
Oh, cool.
And then each of those parts is broken down into 4 different months. So we get the 12 months of the year. So for part 1, for discipline of perception, we have clarity, passions and emotions, awareness, and unbiased thought. So I thought what I'm going to do this year is write an album. I'm going to call it Discipline 1, Perception, and I'm going to write a song for each of those ideas. So one about clarity, one about passions and emotions, one about awareness, one about unbiased thought. Just as, again, as a challenge, because how do you turn those ideas into compelling songs?
Right.
That's what I'm going to try to find out. I mean, I think I was successful in some of the topics I picked for last year's album. I did like Amor Fati, and I did Memento Mori and Sympatheia. So I had some of those concepts that I think I turned into songs that I'm super happy with personally. So that's going to be my challenge for this year. Musically, I think it's going to kind of be along the same lines as what I'm working on currently. Again, just still trying to push myself, but I feel like the sound I'm going with right now is working pretty well. One of the other things I liked about writing about something like Stoicism is that I'm not writing about myself.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm doing right now for my album. So my debut studio full-length album is basically just about myself and like my experience and all of that. So that is always a concern when I'm writing for RPM, is that because I've been working on this album for a couple of years now, that I don't want to write something that I end up wanting. I mean, I could put it on the album if I wanted, but I don't really want to do that. Like I like when things are clean and divided, and so I want RPM to be its own thing, and then anything that I write for the album to exist there. So I like that this is very separate from the stuff I'm writing about right now.
And it gives you an opportunity to practice writing in a different take a different approach to writing, where you're not writing about yourself, you're writing about ideas kind of outside of yourself, which is a good, it's a good thing to exercise, right? So, and that 100%. Might filter into your songwriting for your album as well. Like, so there could be some, like, it's always good to step outside of your typical way of working or whatever, because you can, you don't know how that stuff's going to be brought back and applied to your everyday work.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's, unfortunately, I mean, something I'm pretty comfortable writing is about ideas. I've been doing that off and on since I started songwriting. A lot of it naturally turns to me in my experience, but I love to experiment when I songwrite. I love to try things, and I draw to from a lot of the music I've listened to. So, being a huge Pink Floyd fan means that there's sort of that in my head, in my creative space. So I like playing with bigger ideas. Right, yeah. And so, yeah, it does, there is an element that feels very natural to me, but because it's so different than what I'm writing right now, yeah, it gives me that space to just put on a different hat. So I'm not wearing the Michelle's life experience hat. I'm just wearing the this is an idea I'm trying to explore and trying to understand it better because, you know, when I'm writing about my experience, like that's something I experienced. These are ideas I've had, feelings I've felt, like things I've dealt with. Like that's deeply, deeply personal. And there's no arguing for any of that. But when you're dealing with an idea, there's so much room for interpretation.
Yes.
So it still is going to be through my experience and through my, you know, musical tastes and all of that. So, you know, the way I could write an album like this is very different than what somebody else could do. But I like that I get to play with something that is a little bit more, you know, open to interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also then this sets me up for the next couple of years after. So
yes.
next year I'll do Discipline 2.
I was kind of
action, and then I'm going to do Discipline 3. Yeah, will. So just in case that wasn't clear, I love the idea that I still get to do this 3-part Stoic album that I had the idea for, but I'm going to do it during the time I'm guaranteed to get an EP done.
Which is nice because you're not pulling your attention away from
exactly
your primary goal. You're, you know, like this is, yeah, that's cool.
Because, yeah, for the next few years, this is going to be my focus, is getting my full-length album done.
Yeah.
So I'm writing this year. Hopefully next year I can go and get it produced and recorded. And then after that, have a release. And I want to be able to go and do some touring and perform and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's my big project. And so I like that this is just one little, like, dip out of that into something different, and that I get to challenge myself. I might end up, I mean, you know, there's still a couple of weeks. I might end up all of a sudden having an idea for something musically that I want to do as sort of a challenge. I have like a rough idea of how I'm going to approach each song, because I have kind of 2 strategies I use when I write songs in Ableton. So one that's more of like using what's called session view, and then one that's using the arrangement view. So anybody who uses Ableton will know what I mean there. But maybe I'll come up with some other idea that's a little bit more musically something that'll push me. Maybe I'll go spend some time on YouTube and just see if I can find some ideas or something.
Yeah.
Just to push myself musically. But yeah, certainly in terms of like the theme, I like the idea of just having something very, very clear like that. But again, I feel like there's enough wiggle room. I'm not going to feel too boxed in.
Right. Yeah, cool.
All right. And anybody who wants to participate, if I've inspired you, if I've convinced you to give RPM a try, if you are a musician listening to this, remember
or me.
or non-musicians, yeah.
I feel like I should, just because I'd be hilarious.
I would be so excited to hear you do a song for RPM. I could help you if you wanted to like come here and record.
You would have to like do it for me. What would I do? No, I think
I mean,
I'll be there. I'll be doing this with you in spirit, but I don't think I'll actually.
Well, maybe one year we'll get you doing one.
Maybe.
I know you've expressed interest in doing some singing and stuff like that.
Yeah, so. Yeah.
We'll work on it.
But I cut you off. Okay, so because anyone who's interested, where do they go?
So you can go to, I think it's just rpmchallenge.com. I don't think they're actually, the signups aren't quite open yet, but I think it'll be like any day now. They have a little sign on their front page just saying like, registration opens soon. And so you just have to sign up, and you just pick whatever challenge you want. Again, you can do just a single song if you feel like an EP or an album is way too daunting. Like I'm probably never going to try for an album. That's just too much. I have to remember to read out my thing from last year. Yeah, because an EP, I will tell you from experience, is a lot of work. It is all consuming. It takes everything, but is it ever rewarding? It is maybe my favorite month of the year, even though it can be so stressful and so challenging. It's such a good thing to come out of. And especially if you can find a group that you can do this with. So if you are a musician and you have musical friends and you want to get together and do it as a team, I would encourage you to do that. Or you can go check out the Discord channel that they have for RPM. Maybe go sign up if you want to for Courtney's Patreon, because it's a great group and we're all, again, really encouraging, and it's just a really fun time. We're going to be meeting regularly throughout the month. We're doing a collaborative challenge this year together. So like that's really exciting. So there are lots of opportunities to, take the shortest month of the year and often the coldest, depending on where you live, and like really do something special with it. So you get into the springtime already feeling like you did something.
Yeah.
So here's my it's just, I'm not going to read the whole journal entry. It was just something that made me laugh when I read it. Let me just make sure I'm not.
Yeah, make sure not to read that part where you complain about me.
Yeah, like, oh, Robyn, at it again. Okay, yeah, here. So this is Friday, February 17th, 2023. So this is like just the halfway point.
Right.
I'm already going nuts.
Right.
So I say, I'm so exhausted, I can't even begin to describe it. I'm finding it hard to focus and to think straight when it comes to anything other than RPM. I feel like most of the areas of my life are suspended and hanging around me in some kind of gelatin. I can see my books and my controller, and I remember how much I enjoy those things. This has been the most all-consuming project I've ever done, as far as I can think of. Yeah, and there's more to it, but that was the bit that made me laugh. The fact that I was looking around at like my books, and my controller is like my video game controller, and like I'm like, I remember I enjoyed those things.
I remember those times.
It's like a distant past,
Yeah.
a distant version of me who no longer exists. She's dead now. Only RPM. No Michelle, just RPM.
I also love the way you described it was kind of like, you could tell that you've been in like songwriting mode too. Like you have like the...
Yeah. Yeah, it does something to me. And I was right. Like that last year's was the most intensely I've ever worked on anything ever. And again, it was so worth it. Like, and I was in that sort of space where like I wish I had more time, but I was also really looking forward to having it be done. But I was also really happy to be there. So it was really fun still. It was like some of the most fun I've had writing songs ever.
Right.
But it's also, so it's this weird jumble. So you get to the kind of to the end, I always just feel kind of like a shell. Like
Yeah.
there's not a lot left. But I tend to bounce back pretty quickly. And when the dust settles, you get a chance to really stop and think about what you accomplished. And again, that's just, nothing makes you feel more capable of doing the things you want to do than doing something like that.
Yep. Doing hard things is really important. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I think because so many of us spend so much time being so exhausted and overwhelmed, we think we want things to be easier. We want them to be hard, but we want them to be the right kind of hard.
Yeah.
And doing this kind of a creative challenge is the right kind of hard. It's the kind of thing that leaves you feeling like a more capable, creative, resilient person.
Where there's growth, right? Like
100%.
Yeah. Like if you're doing hard things, but there's growth there, that's the important stuff. When you're just doing hard stuff, but there's no growth, then that's the
exactly,
stuff you need to
yeah.
re-examine. Yeah.
Yeah. So the right kind of hard things are going to help you grow in the right direction.
Yeah.
And this is an idea I heard Adam Grant talk about in an interview he did when he was supporting his book Hidden Potential, where he talked about people like wanting to feel like they're growing. Like that's an important part of being happy in life, is feeling like you're growing towards something. And this is a big push. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the kind of slow growth that you have just over the course of a year, as you're working on things. And for me, I'm always practicing and I'm always writing. So at the end of the year, I have all these little wins and these little growth spurts. But after February, it's huge. Like, and again, it kind of sets me up for the rest of the year, which is part of why I like having it happen so early in the year. It almost makes March feel like my new year.
Right.
Like, because January is kind of interesting because I can't really get into anything new because I know it's going to be interrupted.
Right.
So it's sort of like almost December extended in a little way, except that I'm not taking time off. I'm just working. But this year was a little bit easier because I'm kind of just continuing things. I didn't really want to start anything new in January. I was just taking the stuff I was already doing and just continuing with it. So actually, I think this year has been easier. I'm not feeling that same kind of like anxiety around having to stop something I've just started. It's just, I'm just going to keep things going. So actually, I'm in a much better headspace, I think, this year. And I think also doing 4 songs rather than the 7 I did last year will make a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Cool. So in terms of the week coming up, first of all, like I was skeptical of this topic. I was like, I don't know what we're going to talk about because I don't have any very little experience with challenges, but this has been really cool and like really kind of has inspired some ideas for me. So that's cool. What's your goal for this week?
You know, I think this week is just going to be a continuation of last week. I got some really good momentum going with the music stuff I was working on. So I just want to keep going in that direction. I want to get some more work done on some of my other songs for my album that I'd sort of, clarified some of the next steps. So I think I'd like to get those steps done. Other than that, I think that's it. I mean, I think that's it. I'm starting to think now also in terms of getting some things wrapped up before RPM. So I have some things I've been practicing that I'd like to get to a certain point before I can put them aside and feel like I'm good to go. So I'll be making some progress on that. So yeah, I guess it could be summed up as just album work, practicing, RPM preparation.
Yeah.
I think that'll be it. What about you?
I think I'll continue sort of thinking about my creative values and personal values, and I think I will challenge myself to. I started a big painting, and I suspect it'll be a landscape. I don't know. I just started putting paint on the canvas, and I don't really know what's going to happen with it. So I think a goal is to continue that because
Nice.
it's been sitting on the easel now for a couple of days and I haven't touched it. And I'm like, I don't want this one to sit in a position of not being finished. Like I want to move it past that point. So yeah, so I think I'll spend some time revisiting that this week.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Please feel free to send in questions or comments to streamofartpodcast@gmail.com. And again, please consider if you're a musician, checking out the RPM challenge and try to connect with some folks and have a good time and really challenge yourself. And we will see you in the next episode.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.